Verseo, your one-stop solution to everything learning. Verseo, your one-stop solution to everything learning. Verseo.
A very good evening, everyone. It's Ajay Bilav here again, and I'm going to be your host for today's session. And without any ado, before we dive into the topic, I want to just get a quick check over the chat. You guys can hear me and you guys can see me properly, right? Just quick cheer in the chat. Okay, great. You guys can hear me properly. As I've told, it's Ajay Bilav, and we do conduct live premium webinars on several topics which is relevant to your future or else relevant to your things that you are looking for in your future, right? And today's topic is a most interesting topic for geeks and for technical students, that is introduction to how to work on artificial intelligence research paper, in terms of, let's say, if you're working on research paper, or if you need any help in building some research paper, what it takes, what all things that is needed for that, all those things would be discussed uh, in this session. And yep, and I believe you guys have already seen the post and circulation messages that we have done. And I believe you have an idea who is the speaker for today. We have Ramit, and he would be the speaker. Before I go ahead with the introduction, Ramit, can you just
Hi,
say hi to
everybody.
the
Thanks for
viewers?
joining in. And super excited about the next hour where we're going to talk about a couple of things. Back to you, Ajay.
Great. So, yeah, a quick introduction of Ramit. I won't take much time of yours because you would be interested and you would be waiting to hear from Ramit. So, Ramit is a 2018 computer engineering graduate who had graduated at the top of his class in NSIT, and Ramit works as an engineering manager at Tower Research Capital and a research associate at the Georgia Institute of Technology and Triple IT Delhi. And Mr. Ramit had published 19 papers, and here are there are a lot of papers that I would can tell you about, but let's hear it from him itself, because I think that he would be the better person to guide you on that. And Amit's focus lies in distributed system, fintech, AI, and NLP. I think he is the best person to guide you in terms of technical knowledge that you are looking for, and get the best out of this session, guys, whatever the doubts that you have. So we have segregated this session into two halves. One would be Ramit would be telling about the things which is required for research papers and everything. At the end, we would be taking a Q&A session just for you, for your doubts that you have collected throughout, and you can present it, and I would be waiting for your interesting questions. Let's take those also at the end. Okay, so without further ado, I would be handing it over to Ramit. Ramit, it's all yours. You can take it forward. Thanks so much.
Yeah, thanks a bunch, Ajay. That was a very great introduction. And for everyone who's tuned in today, extremely grateful to have all of you here. And the goal of the session is fairly straightforward. So, when my entire journey since I graduated in 2018, and think of what I'm going to say is as a continuation to the introduction that Ajay gave. So, back in 2018, when I graduated from NSIT, my goal was pretty simple. The goal was to get a decent paying job. I think that's what most of us have as a goal. Over time, that evolved a little bit. I started getting into AI research. Now, the thing with AI research is it seems very interesting. There are lots of benefits in terms of doing it. And we'll go over all of those things, such as what even is AI research? Why do you need to publish a paper? What does publishing a paper even get you? Are these jobs better paying? Do you end up getting better salaries? Is it better career growth, more learning opportunities? We'll go over that. But my goal was to do this. Now, the big problem was, how do I do this? And I think even till today, there's not a lot of information, especially for people in India, in terms of how to achieve this. For example, there are lots of universities abroad, like USA is a good example, where research culture is fostered and there are lots of great opportunities. But when it comes to people in India, one of the opportunities that they can go for is maybe to do a master's or a PhD and move abroad. But what I'm going to try and dissect today is, how can you do this in India, kind of like how I have. Obviously, you can also end up going for a master's, but often to get admitted to master's programs these days, you need to have papers already. So the core goal is, we'll try to go over first what my journey was in 5 minutes, which will help you understand what makes me perhaps a good person to guide you through some of these things. And then, why is AI research even important? Like, I'm sure a lot of you are interested in doing it, but I feel like it's important to quantify what all you can get out of it. Like, what exactly do you get by doing it? And also kind of deciding if it's not for you. I think there's a lot of value in deciding if you should not do something. So we'll try and decide what you should do and why you're doing it. After that, we'll take a slightly more deep dive and get into what even are papers, right? So AI research is a broad field. And then we'll try to understand what is your way of making a mark in the AI research world. And that's done through research papers. So we'll get into what are these research papers, why are research papers even a thing. And then we'll probably get into a very brief, because it's a fairly long process, but I'll try to simplify the process as easily as I can in terms of, how do you get started with your own paper. Today, so when I started back in 2018, I had no idea. I was Googling stuff like, what is machine learning, artificial intelligence, how to get a high paying job, the standard stuff. Over time, I realized there's something called research papers. It took me a very long time to understand, how do I write a paper of my own? And more importantly, how does this paper end up getting accepted and published and go into the real world, where it actually starts building your profile? Maybe some of you have heard of something called Google Scholar. Even if you haven't, all of you would have opened Wikipedia, right? So when you go on Wikipedia, everything that's highlighted in blue, like a hyperlink, it always has a reference, number one, number two. So if you go and search for something like artificial intelligence on Wikipedia now, there'll be a bunch of references or links. Or when you do a school or college project, you always put a bibliography, right? That means you pick up stuff from some other research. That research is the published research. And we'll try to go over what is the process of publishing your own research. Towards the end, I'll leave you with one roadmap. I think there are many ways to get into it. I'll leave you with the one that helped me the most, which you can think as your starting journey of getting into AI research. And then obviously we'll take up questions, as Ajay mentioned. So the goal with those questions is that we'll try to cover some more things in detail, take up special cases or any other things that I might have missed. So with that, I'll briefly begin with my introduction from a research perspective. And keep in mind that any and all questions are welcome, so don't hesitate at all. My goal all throughout has always been making AI research more accessible. So feel free to shoot your questions. I've put up my entire name here. Connect with me on social media. Hopefully, we'll have more sessions. That Ajay will help us host. So over time, we will stay connected. You'll keep learning. And with that, let's begin. So I'm Ramit. I graduated in 2018 from NSIT. I'm a computer science student. Now, the interesting thing when I was graduating was there was no machine learning or AI course in my college. I think some colleges, maybe IITs or maybe the more top tier colleges have those now. But still, some of the colleges don't have these kind of opportunities at all, which left me and leaves most people today with the option of doing something like an online course. Now, when you do these online courses, there's a lot to learn. It becomes difficult in terms of, what should I learn? Where should I start? Should I do a project? Should I do a Kaggle competition? Should I put my code on GitHub? Or should I publish a paper? And I went through the exact same set of problems. The only difference was that I needed to publish a bachelor thesis. It was mandatory in my college. So when I published my bachelor's thesis internally, so it was like a project report, my advisor said, why don't you try and publish this paper? And I said, what does publishing even mean? Like, my first question was not even why should I publish? It was like, what do you mean by publishing it? And to break it down, I think 4 years later, I've learned that publishing means that your paper is now recognized internationally and it has some IP. IP is intellectual property. So now that paper belongs to you. It adds to your profile. So now if you go and Google my name today, you'll get my list of papers. And now, why was that important for me? Over the last 4 years, in fact, the reason why you've probably joined today's webinar is also because I have those papers, right? There's some experience that I've gained through those papers over these years. And that's kind of why you're here listening to me. So those papers help you build a profile. So I essentially went from just another person who was a CS undergrad who had, I'd say, nothing special in their profile to publishing one paper. The moment I published the first paper, I realized that, this is interesting. It's going to give my career a lot of growth. So let me continue doing this. Over time, I've built so many connections, given keynotes. The amount of opportunities it's opened for me in my career, monetary and non-monetary exposure has been immense. And with that, today, like Ajay mentioned, I have a good number of papers that I'm very happy to call my own. That intellectual property has drastically helped a lot of things in the AI community, and I can see the impact that I'm making. And parallelly along with that, I also work as an engineering manager at a high frequency trading firm called Tower Research Capital. Some of my work at times involves ML there, but I also do research on the side. Along with that, research has also been my gateway to getting opportunities with foreign institutions. So one way of getting affiliated with foreign institutions is, you do a master's or PhD, you move abroad and you have to pay a big course fees. This course fees at times can be north of 50 lakhs. In some cases, it can be a crore. So what is a good way of working with these foreign universities? This is a question I get on LinkedIn every single day. The answer to that is showing that you can do research. Universities abroad are very interested in research. They invest a lot of money. Even the governments invest a lot of money in R&D. So our goal and my goal specifically has always been that I use my research to make connections internationally. That's what's allowed me to start working with big institutions like Georgia Tech, University of Marburg. Some of my recent papers are with MIT, Stanford. And the only reason that has happened is because they are interested in AI research and we are able to contribute in AI research. So with that being a brief introduction about myself, I've kind of already given you some motivation on why AI research. Continuing a little bit more in terms of why AI research. So let's quantify it. What are the things that you get out of AI research? So I'm going to start drawing on the screen. Hopefully my horrible handwriting is legible to you, some of you people. So the first thing is jobs. Now, I don't think I need to explain this to people, but you already know AI, machine learning, natural language processing. This is kind of the future of tech. It's leading to automation of jobs, self-driving cars, speech-to-text understanding, recommendation algorithms on Instagram. Basically, the world is running on AI right now. Everything is focused on that. Even crypto trading, stock trading that I do at work, all of it is related. So it's a very high demand skill, which means that the number of jobs in the AI industry are large. Now, think of it as such. How many software engineers do you know? And then if I had to ask you, how many AI specialist software engineers do you know? The number is going to be pretty different, right? In fact, if I think today, how many students do I know who are doing Geeks for Geeks or Lead Code versus I see how many of them can code a neural network? The number is going to be starkly different, which opens up a very common problem of demand and supply. There is a very, very, very large demand of AI specialists, and there is a very small supply, especially in India. Now, the benefit of that to us is that these jobs have a significantly higher pay. And an example of that is if today you go and become a software engineer at Google versus you go and become a research scientist at Google. So a research scientist is someone who publishes papers and does what we're going to talk about today. There's a significant pay difference between these two. I leave those numbers and all of that research to you people to go and Google it. But you can go on Google Research's website or Google Brain or Facebook AI Research. You'll see those websites are different. They don't hire the same way they do for regular software engineering roles. So essentially, more jobs, better pay, more job security. That's one of the biggest reasons. The second is your own IP or your own profile building. So before I had any research of my own, people only knew me as another student from NSIT. Maybe after I got a job, they would know me as another software engineer in Tower Research or in Google or Facebook or whatever. But the moment you publish a paper, that paper stays with you forever. So you can switch a job, right? I can switch a job and tomorrow that job will no longer be mine. I might lose the tag of being an engineer at Tower Research Capital someday. But a paper once published, it stays with you forever. It's like an IP that is built. For example, even if Apple stops manufacturing iPhones tomorrow, they will still be the only people who can manufacture an iPhone. So essentially, what you're doing is you are creating papers that will be there with your name for the end of, well, there is no end to that. Even when you stop existing, researchers who are there, like you think Nikola Tesla, Thomas Edison, their research still stays till today. It's published in books and it stays and teaches for generations. So what you're doing is you're kind of immortalizing your work, and this all happens publicly. Unlike company work, which you do, or college work, which you do in a small area and it never sees a big international audience. These papers are searchable on Google. A good example is a lot of papers of mine have been picked up by newspapers like Times of India, Wall Street Journal, New York Times, all of these things. The only reason that happens is because every time you do AI research, you're contributing to the world. So essentially what you're doing is you're making yourself stand out from everyone else. Now, I wouldn't like to necessarily say I'm very different from others who work at Tower Research Capital, but let's say the amount of engineers at Tower Research Capital are around 300. How many of them have published AI papers? It will not be all 300. It will be a smaller number. So what you're doing is you're differentiating yourself, and a good word of it, a good way of calling it is that you are upskilling yourself. So essentially, AI research helps you upskill. It helps you stay competitive in a job market that is already very difficult to navigate into. So these are three things. The fourth is networking. And this links to the things like jobs and profile building, etc. So the good thing is when you publish a research paper of your own, when you have AI research, one, it gets picked up in newspapers and it's spoken about everywhere. The second thing is when you publish, you also have to present this at a conference. Now, a conference is like an avenue where thousands or at times tens of thousands of top researchers, this would mean MIT, Stanford, Google, Facebook, these all the dream companies and institutions that we have, all of these people are at these conferences. So when I went for my first conference, this was back in 2019, I was shocked to see the amount of like the legends who are there, who, the people who like introduced and invented what a neural network is. You can go and talk to these people. You meet them. You are able to apply for jobs at Google Research, etc. right there. They will take your interview there and then at the conference. The only way you can attend these conferences if you have your own papers there. So it's a whole different world where there's a lot to gain. A, in terms of money, pay, better opportunities, networking, and B, from your own growth perspective, for you to build a profile and a better career path for yourself, whether or not you change your company tomorrow. So this is kind of some of the brief reasons on why I personally ended up getting into AI research. For instance, I have a full-time job, though the one at Tower Research Capital. It's a full-time job. As a manager, in fact, a lot of times as a manager, it takes up a lot of my time. So weekdays, almost impossible to get any time. Yet I still do AI research. The reason I do that is because of all of these benefits. Now, I think most of you who are attending might already know some of these benefits, but I wanted to quantify and kind of continue to motivate you people in terms of why AI research is important. Now, taking one step further and moving on to what are papers and why? Why does one care about papers specifically? Are there not better ways to do AI research? So a paper, now the best way of summarizing a paper is that it's some document. So think of it as a document, which will usually be most recently in AI, specifically for AI. It's something that is between 8 to 16 pages. And a paper should have what we like to call as a novel idea. So now you might wonder, what is a novel idea? So a novel idea is something that is new, something that improves something existing. So it improves something. And lastly, it is something that I would say what we like to call in the AI world is the state of the art, which means it's the best in its league. So let me give you an example of what such a novel idea could be. All of you know what Netflix's search works like, right? Or rather, let me give you an even better example. Everyone here uses LinkedIn, Twitter, or Instagram, right? So years ago, if you would remember, when I would go on something like Instagram, my feed used to be sorted on time. So basically, the first post I would see would be the post that would be posted most recently. Or in LinkedIn, also, I would see the most recent post, Facebook news feed, the most recent one. Now, today, if I go and open LinkedIn or Instagram or Twitter, it will not show me the most recent post. It will show me what it thinks I want to see. This is what we call in common terminology as personalization. So when you go on Netflix and it tells you this movie is recommended for you, it's kind of learned, right? That what kind of movies do you like? Do you like more horror movies? Maybe you saw Conjuring 1 and Conjuring 2. So maybe I should suggest Annabelle to you. Maybe you saw Fast and Furious, the past series of it. So now I should show you the next one. Similarly, if you go on Instagram, it shows you whatever it thinks you would like to see first. So this idea which says that we should personalize for every single person. Now you see if it when this came back. So it's been about 10, 12 years that this idea came. And that was a research paper. So today, if you go to Netflix's blog or Google's blog, you'll find these ideas, personalization, recommender systems, etc. So when this first came, this idea was new. It improved something significantly. What did it improve? It improved the user experience, the retention of the user on these platforms. So you improved how Instagram worked or Netflix worked or whatever. State of the art means it did it in the best possible way. Is there a better way of doing that till today? No. When that better way comes, at that point, a new paper will also show up. Now, the reason this paper stays in something like 8 to 16 pages is because we want a small idea. So, there can be bigger papers which go up to 200, 300, 500 pages. They can become entire books. The books that you see today, let's say if I look at the most common book of data structures and algorithms, like CLRS, for example, that would be a combination of thousands of research papers that have been published on data structures and algorithms. So the idea is one paper has one core idea, and many such papers together can be combined to publish a book. So let's say tomorrow, if you publish 5, 6 top level papers, your next step would be to convert those all into a book and publish a book of your own. So that's essentially what a paper is. Now, like a book, even after you stop existing, you stop working, let's say I stop working, the book still stays, right? The work I did, that idea will always be there forever. And tomorrow, more people can buy that paper or they can refer to that paper in their own study and so on and so forth. Now, the more your paper is used by other people, like, let me give you a common example. Everyone here knows what binary search is, right? Hopefully, most people have heard the word binary search at least. So someone invented the idea of binary search, right? And now we use it for everything in this world. So the paper that introduced binary search was a research paper that became popular. Google search is another example of that. So similarly, having these papers to your name helps kind of increase the visibility of your work, and then coincidentally helps you get better jobs and builds your profile and all of those things. So in summary, a research paper is something that's between 8 to 16 pages that presents a new idea that improves something and now becomes the state of the art. That means it does it in the best possible way that is there at the present moment. Some examples of common research papers that most people would have heard of. So binary search, you can think of something like segment trees, recommendation at Netflix. If you've heard of neural networks, for example, if I take one step further, maybe something like recurrent neural networks. Each of these things came out as a single research paper between 8 to 16 pages. All of these, they all follow the same criteria. And research papers, in fact, exist not only for AI, but they also exist in biology and chemistry and everything. So even the latest COVID vaccines that have come out, there will be a paper that describes what their formulation was, how were they created, what all is contained in that vaccine. So a research paper basically describes this novel idea. Essentially, you can think that in the AI world, you'll always have an algorithm. So the paper is basically a description of this algorithm. And when I say description, I mean it has the math formulation, which is why some research papers look like they have a lot of complex math, because with maths, they are explained. So it will have everything you can imagine: equations, graphs, whatever you can think of. Then it will also have other things like limitations, like when can't you use this algorithm. For example, binary search can't be used on an unsorted array. So all of this information is contained in a research paper. And then what happens is, as an author, I can start publishing multiple research papers, sometimes one after the other or all together at a time. It's kind of like working on a book or working on a project. You can work on multiple projects together, you can focus on just one. Now, once you publish a paper, it becomes available at something called Google Scholar, which most of you might have heard. So I'm going to stop showing this for a second, and I'm going to open my browser here. Just a second. So today, if I go and Google search for Google Scholar Ramit Sawhney, so you'll see this. And Ajay, this is visible, right? You can see my browser and Google Scholar now.
Actually, your Google Meet is visible.
Okay.
Can you show the yeah, now it is visible.
Okay, now it's fine.
No,
So
sorry, Ramit. The previous, just a second before.
now
No.
that's
Can
weird.
you minimize the Google Meet?
Maybe let me
Just when you hovered on the other screen, it was.
one sec. I'll just make this
Yeah.
smaller.
Now it is.
Okay, awesome. So what you're seeing here is my Google Scholar, and every single thing here is a research paper. So this is one research paper. This is another research paper, and this is when it was published. This was the year. So now if I go and click on one of these papers, and these are all available on the net, by the way. So if you go and search for this on Google today, let's say I go and search for this on Google now, this paper will automatically show up. You can see this here. So now I can go click on it, and this is where it's published. ACL is a top NLP conference. So you can see when the conference happened. You can see that happened in Australia. This is the publisher. It has this ID. So this ID is like the unique ID of a book. So it's very similar to a book in that way. And then I can go and look at the PDF of this paper, which is what you submit to a conference. So essentially, when you want to write your paper, you have to create a paper like this. So as you can see, it's a 9-page paper. I won't go through all the paper in detail, but this is what it looks like. It's a PDF where you describe. So I've given an abstract on what we are doing. We give an introduction. Then after that, we will show some, like here we are showing what our neural network architecture is. So this is the novel idea that we are presenting in this paper. And then we'll show what the results are. So you can see some of the results over here. So essentially, this is what a research paper has. It has a very common structure. You give an introduction on what problem are you trying to solve. Then you try and say, what have other people done so far to solve this problem? Then you say that this is the problem with what other people did. So I'm coming up with my new idea. And this is what my new idea looks like. This is what we do. After you do that, you show how your newer idea is better than all the other ideas. Once you do all of that, you write this, you try to explain why you've done what, give all the details. So for example, if you look over here in pre-processing, in the methodology on the right side, you can see here, I'll zoom a little bit into this. You can see here that we have given every single step. So this is what is happening in the code. The steps don't matter. You don't need to focus on those. The idea is in the paper, you describe every single thing you do. So this is step 1, step 2, step 3. So the paper is a description of what you've done, how you did it, and why is it better than everything else that exists. After you do all of this, your paper PDF is then finally created. And that brings me to the next part. Sorry, actually, before getting into the next part of how is this paper then published and selected and reviewed, let's go back to the Google Scholar again. So like this, I can have multiple different papers with other different authors. So over the years, I've collaborated with some of these co-authors who you see here. They're mostly professors, some in India, some in Georgia Tech, some in Singapore, Europe, and things like that. And this graph is basically how over time, more and more people have started referencing my work, which is kind of what has helped my career grow even more. So if I go on year-wise here, you'll see some of my more recent research publications, like even from 2022. So each of these is a research paper that has been published at some kind of conference. And I have to go to a conference internationally, present that. Once the paper is accepted, then the paper comes online for others to use. And that's kind of when it gets picked up by newspapers and other prospective job employers. Like tomorrow, if someone Googles me, all my papers will show up, which is why it becomes important to have these published papers. Now getting a little bit into the next part, which is the paper review and paper publication process. So let's try to understand this in a simple way. So we've understood that you need to create a paper, which is basically a PDF, and this is something between 8 to 16 pages. So we all know this by now. And let's say you work with your friends to create this paper. You've done the best you could in terms of making this paper. You've given your results. You think the results are the best. You think your idea is the greatest, all of that. Now, the reason why research is important and the reason why it's valued is not everyone can publish a paper. It's not easy to publish a paper. In fact, it's a very difficult process. Why? Because it's a competitive process. It's almost like a competitive exam. So when we give JEE, for example, millions of people sit for it and only a few qualify. Exactly the same thing happens with research papers. Millions of research papers are submitted to the top conferences every year, and only a handful of those make it through it. Now, the only difference is how do these millions of papers get selected? And that happens through something called as the paper review and publication process. So these lines over here, sorry, bad underlining from me, but we call it here as the peer review process. Now, what exactly does the peer review process mean? It means very simply that your peers, that means the other researchers in the field, they are the best equipped to do it. They will review your papers. So it's kind of like saying that your IIT, JEE or your college exam papers will be graded by your friends or your classmates, and only the top 10 classmates will be selected, which means that it's a competitive process, right? The people who you are competing against, those are the people who are going to review your paper. So it is in their best interest, if they want their paper to be published, to not review or give your paper a very high score. Only the top papers thus will make it through, which is why when you submit, say 10,000 papers, say only 100 papers will actually make it. In a lot of cases, this would be amounting to somewhere usually between a 5 to 15% acceptance rate, which is a very, very low acceptance rate. A lot of times, I personally also, I've seen cases where we've submitted papers for years, we've improved papers for tens of years, and those papers continuously get rejected. They don't make it through. And every time we have to go through this process called a peer review process. So here's how it happens. And let me give you an example to kind of understand what this peer review process is. So you created your paper and you submitted your paper to a conference. Okay. Now, like this, there are 10,000 papers that will be submitted. These will be from researchers all around the world. So like Google AI, Stanford, your college, your classmates, everything you can imagine, everyone will have submitted their papers. So it's a big pool and there's no restriction on who can do it. It can be an undergraduate student, it can be a high school student, or it can be a researcher who is 60, 70 years old, who is doing research from 40 years. This will be there. Now, here's a good and bad part about AI research. These 10,000 papers will be made double blind. So what exactly does double blind mean? It means that your name and your identifying information will be thrown out of this paper. So that it means that the person who will review your paper or who will score your mark sheet, they will never know who you are, where you came from, or anything. Now think of the way jobs currently happen. When you apply for a job, doesn't everything you've done in the past matter so much? For example, if I have Google on my resume, now everyone wants to hire me. But if I'm from a tier 3 college and I have no good company on my resume, they won't want to hire me, right? So the good part about AI research is that no information about you is revealed. Only your work is judged, nothing more. The bad part about this double blind process is you are now competing with the best of the best in the world. That means when I, as a reviewer, will get 3 papers to review, it is possible that one paper will be from an undergraduate in a tier 3 college in India, and the second will be from the top researchers in Stanford who are doing AI research from the last 40 years. And to the conference, those 2 papers have no difference at all. That means you are competing with the best of the best. And at this point, getting your paper accepted is a very big deal, and everyone understands that. So these 10,000 papers basically become double blind. No information is shared about these papers, only the PDF. So in fact, tomorrow when you go and submit a paper, you will see that, in fact, why am I even telling you that? Let me show you properly. Let me show you over here. So let's say I go to one of the biggest conferences that is there, like this one. So this is a very big NLP conference that I'm showing you here. And if I go to their call for papers.
Ramit, sorry, I think
Yeah.
they're not able to see.
Okay, just a second. This
Yep, it
something
is
is
visible
up.
now.
Okay, cool, awesome. So here I have this really famous conference called EMNLP. So I'll show you this again. EMNLP 2022. It's the top NLP and AI conference this year, and they have these restrictions for double blind review. So I want you people to see this here. This is very clearly, and every top AI conference has this. As reviewing will be double blind, papers must not include authors' names and affiliations. There's a lot of other information that is given where you can't even potentially hint that this is your work. But the summary is that AI research always happens and as anonymous people, which makes it very difficult to get your paper published. So that is the first step. So back to where I was explaining this entire process. So we get about 10,000 papers. These become double blind. That means basically we're removing all potential bias that will happen with paper reviewing, etc. After this, these papers are assigned to someone known as an area chair, which we call as AC. So this AC is going to be an expert in the field that you are working on. Let's say your area of expertise is speech translation. Like you like to work in Google Translate and like the translate functionality on your phone. So this area chair will be someone who is an expert in this field. This area chair will then send a paper to some reviewers, let's say R1, R2, R3. You will never know who these people are. They will never know who you are. All three of them will get your paper and they will review your paper. So let's say R1 says that this paper is great, let's accept it. R2 says this paper is great, let's accept it. And let's say R3 says this paper is not great, let's not accept it. Everyone will give you a score, and then the papers with the top scores will make it through, which means that it's a purely competitive process. So if they have decided that they want to accept around, let's say out of 10,000 papers, only say 100 papers, then only the top 100 papers that go through this entire process will be selected. Only those papers and then the authors of those papers will be invited to the conference to present their work and then to publish that work, which will stay online forever. So this peer review process usually takes something like 3 months of time, after which your results are announced. So in most cases, papers are rejected or accepted, whatever. Once your paper is accepted, then you go and present at the actual conference. At this point, this is your biggest networking opportunity because you, in front of all the best researchers in the world, will present your work in person. You'll show them what your work is like. You'll give them your ideas, and then the whole world knows what your work is. This is the point where, so for example, when I gave my first talk in New York in a conference called AAA, once my talk ended, two recruiters immediately, within 5 minutes, reached out to me to start my interview process. This was with two very big companies. So this basically showcases your work. Once you've done these presentations, your paper gets published. It's almost like publishing a book, and it stays online forever. At this point, others can refer to it, cite it, and do all of those different things. Once this paper is published, at that point, you can start working at your next paper. So this is basically a very, very high level gist of what the peer review process is like. So if I had to summarize it, it's kind of like this. Step one is work on your paper. And I'm going to elaborate step one more in this roadmap to get started. So the first is work on your paper. Get a new idea, see what you can improve, work with the team, build that team, work with professors, write your paper. Then you submit. After you submit, this paper becomes double blind. Then your paper is reviewed. Then you get a notification. So the paper is either accepted or rejected. If your paper is rejected, you are back here. You have to work on your paper again, resubmit, and keep going through. If it is accepted, then you present. Once you present, life becomes better. Hear it from me. And after that, your paper is published. So now you would imagine here that the most important part, everything from step 3 to 4 to 5, you have no control over this. What the best you can do is try to work on your paper in the best possible way and hope that that paper gets accepted at one of the top ones. So in the next 10 minutes, I'm going to go over what is a good roadmap to get started with publishing your own paper. So today you learned a little bit about how these get published, why should you publish them, what are the benefits. Now let's talk about if you want to start your own paper, how do you go about it? So even before getting to how do you even get started, you need to have a checklist. I would suggest having 3 things in this checklist. So if you don't have one of these things, okay. If you don't have 2 out of 3 of these things, you're not ready. The first is an idea. There's no need that idea has to definitely succeed. It can be a totally crazy idea. But there should be an idea which is novel or new, something that hasn't been thought of yet. For example, when self-driving cars came out, right? When someone thought of the idea, no one before had thought of a self-driving car. People had never imagined that there can be a car without driving. So some radical idea which doesn't exist, you need to have that. So that it's something new. The second is you need to have a peer group. So an exception to this is that there are people who publish papers solo, single paper authors. But it's very difficult to work on such big ideas. It's kind of like a college project, right? You need to have other people. Whether those people do a lot of work or not is a different question. But you need to have a group of people. Where do you find this group of people? The best is if you're still students, this is your class. If you're enrolled with, some committees, Varsity was a good example here. So other people attending this session, those can be people who you form a community with and start working with tomorrow. People who have the same interest, your classmates, your colleagues at work, or if you don't have anyone, LinkedIn is a very good place. I've in fact made most of my connections at LinkedIn, etc. And over time, when you go and present at a conference, you find more and more co-authors. So the more formal word for this is you need co-authors, people who will help you do this work. Maybe someone who knows how to code better, someone who knows math better. You need other people who can kind of help you get started. The last, it's kind of optional, but I think to start with, it's very helpful. You need a mentor. Who is this mentor? Most cases, this is going to be a professor. So when I started, it was also a professor in IIIT Delhi, Dr. Rajiv Shah. Very grateful to him for my entire career. So with this professor is basically someone who's done this entire process many times before. If they've done it many times before, they'll be the right people to help you and go through this. So if you're in a college, if you're in a company, look at your seniors who will help you grow. If you don't have anyone like that, try to get into communities or attend sessions like ones that Ajay is helping us organize. You need people who can mentor you, grow you, and that community bonding is what's going to be very important to get started. So without these 3 things, it's pretty difficult to get started. Now let's say you have an idea, you have a peer group, and you have a mentor who's there to guide you. Now what next? So I like to break it down in a couple of steps. Now you have your idea. You need to define research questions. So what is a research question? Say my idea is that I want to make a self-driving car. Now that's too big an idea, right? How can I successfully make a self-driving car or not? So I need a very specific question. Let me take that specific question as something like, can I build a car that does not require a driver and it can run safely for 5 minutes on a straight road? Now this research question is a very clear question where I know if this will successfully happen or not. So what you need here is a problem statement. kind of like the problem statements that you have on lead board, like in your list. So you need a very clear goal. You start with a research question. Now that you have a research question, you collect data. So for example, if my research question is that I want to predict if this MRI scan has a cancer or not, then I need to collect more MRI scans. I think everyone here knows that AI requires a certain amount of data. So where does data come from? You have access online, you create your own data. You're looking at social media data, so you collect data. After that, you use your novel idea, the one we have mentioned here at the top. You use your novel idea on this data and see what happens to your research question. Finally, you publish your findings. Publishing means that you start writing your research. So here you have drafts, you have tables, you write basically a bunch of things that what did you do, how did you do, where did you collect data from, how does your method compromise better answers? Use that the best possible way, and then you submit to a conference. Then when you get your paper is accepted, great. You start focusing on the presentation. If your paper is not accepted, at that point you start focusing on how to improve that paper. Usually when you go for a conference, you will get reviews. These reviews, and I can do an example as well. These reviews will tell you to do better. For example, when we have a paper, we presented a new neural network to detect abusive language in Hindi. So our paper got rejected, and they said that your method is very nice, but will your method work for Marathi also? And the answer to that is unfortunately no. There was no way our method could work for other languages. So the review suggested what we could do. We tried that. Those experiments worked. 1 year later, we submitted the paper again, and that time it got accepted. So the good thing is that you have unlimited chances. If your paper doesn't work, you keep improving it. Maybe someday they will, but sometimes if you can't work it, it will improve. So that's very brief on how I would suggest starting with research paper. Get an idea, form a group. Group can be found if you have colleagues in colleges or anything like that. Or if you can find online communities where it's a good example of that, right? And then you find mentors. Then you define the research and say what you want to do, what are we solving, collect the data, run the code those experiments, publish the paper, and then present it at the conference and use the benefits. So I think I have most so I'll pass it back to Ajay and to everyone who's tuned in and is listening. Definitely looking forward to the questions that you all. So let me know. I'll super excited to answer those questions.
Great. Thank you so much for a brief explanation, Ramit. I think audience have got majority of the information related to what they need to do, what is the difference between software development related jobs and what things they need to do in terms of if they want to get into research-based profile or something, right? So I think that explains most of the things. Still, like there are a lot of questions that we have received from our audience previously, and there are questions in the chat also. So let's start. I won't be going at all the questions, but I think most of the questions are related by selling around 6 to 7 questions which you can address, right? And I believe you will be able to give a proper answer to the ones I asked for it, right? So let's start the session. Proceed with the first question that begins as how to manage a career in research with a full-time job, because balancing is the important thing that in the current era, right? And when we begin to write a paper, how to start?
So I think that's a good question, and I think my personal answer. I research started with my full-time job for the last 2 years, and I think the most important way to start and manage this is to be clear at your workplace. That means, so for example, when I started with research, my first conversation with my manager was, "Look, I'm interested in doing research. I think it will also bring value to your company," and you show them how it will bring value to your company. So if you want to do a full-time job, you hire you do it. It's not necessary. It's a work working professionals who also want to do this. And together all of you can go and start working towards a paper. So that would be my suggestion. Have an honest conversation at work. If that doesn't work, try to find another like you. And start building the best way to get AI research is by inviting other research papers, finding research, and then just take your don't worry about just submit it, and then that's that you get reviews will be at the point where you will be able to start publishing and resubmitting and improving your research. So hopefully that
I believe
answers.
the audience who had asked had received the answer for that. And brings to our next question that says, what are parameters that decides the paper is publishable? Like, is it up to the mark or else they can publish the paper, or how to find it out?
So I think there are three parameters that I go and I'll read those. First is your paper idea needs to be novel. That means if you're proposing a solution, and if I can find a similar solution to that online, then it's not going to work. No matter how good your solution is. So they you slight change to buy the church. Then it's not going to be enough. You need something that is different, which is what papers or the idea usually causes the novel. So your paper needs to have some novelty, a new idea. Kind of like when I discussed the self-driving car idea. The second is that you need to be better than other methods. So let's say if you're creating a new AI neural network, it needs to be better than other neural networks that exist. You need to show that with experiments. So you need to prove that method works better than others. Maybe it's more, maybe it is more faster, maybe it is cheaper, model more cost saving, but you need to show that. Kind of like at work, right? When someone asks you like to a project in Python or PHP, mostly everyone would say we need code in Python. So why do you code in Python? Maybe it's faster, maybe it's lower cost, maybe it's easier to do, right? So in competition, you need to be best. Your method needs to be best. The third and the smallest thing is your paper needs to be well written. Imagine if I've done a very good job, but I can't present it very well. People who read the paper don't understand the nuance of it. Then the paper won't be published. So to do that, some suggestions are you don't just write everything. You give diagrams to explain. For example, if it's a neural network or it's a math problem, right? When you look at maths, when I started studying maths, if everything was just written in English, maybe I wouldn't understood. You need examples to learn. So you give a paper full of examples, drawings, diagrams, tables, graphs that help you. So in a nutshell, your paper should be novel. You should be able to beat all the other competitors, and your paper should be easily readable and understandable. So hopefully that answers it.
Yes, I believe the audience had received the answer for that. You just follow the things that have been informed. I believe you will be able to at least start the things that you were able to plan for, right? So, which brings to the third question that we have. How much time and endurance is needed for coming up with this novel idea or doing literature review for idea, and how much time is required to publish a paper in a moderate or impact factor? Like, how much time does it take, or what are the
So I would say a very clear answer to this because every single it's almost like a project at work or anything you do, right? Sometimes if things out in your favor, let's say the first idea you get a great idea and you do everything. Your paper will be published in a short like a month. I've done that. I've had papers where I started working a month, we submitted the paper, 3 months later, the paper got extended. But at times you hit roadblocks, kind of like in life, give you an example when you apply for jobs. Sometimes when we apply for jobs, we just get a job that you apply for. And sometimes you go through so many rejections and then you finally get a job. So that's similar with papers. At times it can take months. In my case, it's taken 1 year for one paper. But in a lot of cases, on average, the more you get better. Like you start, let's say, so a good example is when I had to publish my first paper, it took me 1 year. Today it takes me 1 or 2 months. Mostly because I've done all these things already in the past. So practice and consistency help a lot. But when you start, you need to be ready to put in a lot of hard work without seeing immediate quick results. This is like when you study for data structures and algorithms, right? Or when you start college, you do a lot of hard work in exams and all of that, but you might not get immediate results, even for placements. I can do 100 essay questions today, but maybe I don't get a result. So patience is needed, and the average time that usually takes is months. So hopefully that answers it.
Okay, great. So I think preparation time, that's what give your best time and utilize the things, research, build yourself, and along the career that you have, right? So go ahead with that. I think that would definitely provide you a better understanding of it. And which brings to the next question. The important one I would say, doing the research is the thing, and getting hands on to the things which the viewers or the person is looking for is one more thing. But how to find a proper collaborator or else person for a research? So what are the strategies that they need to follow?
Sure. So I can tell two broad ways. One is if you're, let's say, already in a college or institution, you're doing some kind of body-based classes. Basically, any place you can connect with people in real life. This can even be your workplace or organization. So these are people you actually know, right? Like all my colleagues, I know how they work. I know I would like to work. And when you're in college, you have that work with person my project well. So if you have access to such people, it's easy. Some people don't access to such people. That's the more common mistake. So yeah, it's not very easy to find. The best way of doing that is by attending these conferences, attending networking events, finding and reading research. So today, if you want to do research on computer vision, go and see who on Google Scholar who is publishing in computer vision. Start sending them cold emails. I'll give you a personal example. So I have had an internship in my last year with IT research. I had no idea. That point, I had got a placement with Samsung, so I was pretty much sitting still. I decided that I can just sit and do nothing. Or let me start writing a email to people. And don't just write what you want. Always email say what is it that you write to the other person. So I started writing to, and I think I sent email to about 200 people that Ramit, this is what I do. This is the research. I would like to do this work with you, and send them that email. That some people will reply. I sent one such email and got a collaboration request from my BBA research. 90% of my, I think, except one people, every collaboration of mine has been through a coding email. I send them a list of my papers. I send them my GitHub, my website, my LinkedIn. I tell them that this is the work I do. Would you like to work together? I think this would be good. A most ultimate example of this is I once sent a DM to someone, a professor on Twitter. We started talking, and 4 months later, she invited me for a research visit to Germany, an entirely paid visit to Germany to work with her on a research job. So my suggestion would be there's nothing you have to lose by sending a cold email or a message or anything like that. So showcase what work you can do and start reaching out to people who you would like to work.
Okay, great. Ramit, I'm just getting a question on the audio. Guys, you can hear us properly, right? Yes, no, maybe. Viewers in the chat. Okay. Viewers, can you just give a quick response again? Can you hear us? Yes, no. I think you should be able to hear us properly now. Okay, great. Cool. I believe that had answered your query regarding the last question, and in the chat, uh, okay. So let's dive into the next question without any return. Okay. Okay. A person asked, since you are a research RA at GA Tech, and how are research opportunities in machine learning uh, for people who are pursuing
I
what
think probably they
MSCS
want to do the
and
PhD
want
after
to
the
go to
MSCS.
PhD
So
after
yeah,
what
my
MSCS. If the
suggestion would
person
simply be
wants
that
to do
one, you need to
a
decide if you actually
MSCS
want to do a PhD. It's a 5 year
after the
commitment that
PhD, is
where
any
your
take on
biggest
that,
goal, like
Ravi?
so when you to successfully complete a PhD, you need to publish research papers. There's no if and buts about
Yeah,
it. When
what
you
seems.
do MSCS or when you're doing bachelor's or something, doing research is good. In a PhD, you have to do it no matter what. There is no other option. So there with PhD, you'll obviously have everything that I've discussed here. You will have a professor who will be your PhD advisor. You will have co-authors who will be the people who work in the same lab as you, and they'll help you with getting ideas. So a PhD is the best possible way to do this kind of research, but you need to get started early. You need to start publishing already if you're starting to think about doing a PhD. So my suggestion would be follow some of these steps. Try to use everything you learn in your master's program and combine all of that to get started with your PhD. But again, a disclaimer there is think hard if you actually want to do that PhD. It's 5 years of your life where your biggest goal will be only publishing these kind of papers. So,
Yep. So think wisely, that's what Ramit meant, because you are investing your time along with, and if you uh, are hunting your, what do you say, money goals also, right? I think that would also matter. And yeah, so work wisely and think wisely, and then you can definitely go for it.
so
And
first I
yeah,
relate
so
to
which
the
brings to
problem
the
a
next
lot. Like when I
question:
started,
how many
although we
papers
did
do
a
you
lot of
prioritize
math in college,
math
there
questions
are
which are
some
difficult
papers
to
that just have
understand?
a very
I
advanced
think it
level of
might be
there
from
are
a
only
student
two
or
ways
from
to
a
go about
specialist.
this. One is you
So any
have to learn that
suggestions?
math. Someday or the other, you have to. You can't run away from it. The other is that you try to work in domains that are not very math heavy. So this is for people who don't like a lot of math or don't want to get into deep mathematics. I would then suggest that you focus a little bit on more papers like human computer interaction, data set centric papers, more analytics and analysis. Don't focus too much on very math heavy papers. Otherwise, the only other option is you have to take certain math courses and you have to do that. Some of these things include linear algebra, vector calculus. You'll have to do this. There's no other way around it because you can't skip the maths to understand.
Okay, so huh, yes. So better you understand, and after that, dive into that. Okay, I think that brings an end to the Q&A session. Thank you so much, audience, for your questions and all the other things. I believe you have enjoyed the session. I do understand that there might be some audio glitches at the end due to the technical issues currently that is being faced. But you can definitely write to us if you still have any questions, or let's say something that has to be clarified, right? So we'll hear from you, and after that we'll try to get a response. And definitely we will be going ahead with similar kind of talks in the future, so that you can get the most things that you're waiting for, and you can get your answers over there also. And so yeah, that is end of the session. Thank you so much, Ramit, for your time, for giving your precious time, and for guiding our audience viewers regarding the research path and what they have to do and what kind of things that they need to follow. Anything that you need to say, Ramin, before we
I just like to say that thank you for being here. Thank you for giving me the chance for this. And obviously, this is just a start to these things. So if you ever have questions, like Ajay mentioned, feel free to reach out, and we'll try to do more of these. So hopefully you learned something out of this today, and we're always reachable to answer more of your questions and kind of grow together. So thanks a bunch for the opportunity, and I look forward to the next one.
Great, thank you so much, Ramit. And audience, I highly recommend you to check Ramit on his Instagram handle. I'll be adding his Instagram handle in the chat. You can definitely take a look at his profile, and I think he do post similar kind of things in his LinkedIn handles also. You can follow him and you can get most of things out of him. And you can definitely follow Versio for this kind of talks in the future. And if you have any suggestions, any talks that you are looking for, or any topics that you want to get a better idea on, definitely reach us out. We will be getting you those kind of topics which might be difficult to get a hands on for you, right? So we try to get those things arranged and try to get the best out of these kind of talks because these are premium and it is useful for you. So that's all from my end. And before I wind up, I will be posting the attendance form also in the chat. So you can quickly fill those.
Thank you. Visit verzeo.com, subscribe to our channel to know
And that's
more.
all from my end. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Guys.
Visit verzeo.com, subscribe to our channel to know more.
I believe it's
Thank you. Visit verzeo.com, subscribe to our channel to know more.
That's all.
Thank